So it appears that the Prime Minister of Japan, the Cabinet Office, is angry for some really hard questionings that was made during the airing of News 9, which is a flagship news program of NHK. This has happened before. I mean, Japanese politicians are not accustomed to, to be asked hard questions, and so there's no hard talk on Japanese television when politicians are, invited to, to present their case. I mean, they are kind of, given a red carpet treatment, and there's this Japanese word omotenashi, which is the idea that, for example, in the tea ceremony, the master does his or her best to entertain and give the best time to his guest, to his or her guest, and that is omotenashi. But in Japan, TV programs when politicians are there, almost like doing omotenashi operations instead of asking questions in a journalistic way, checking facts and sometimes confronting what the politicians would like to say. The Japanese TV programs are typically expected to just nod and say, oh, that's a good idea, and all these things, and in a true omotenashi spirit. But when that doesn't happen, when a TV presenter acts in a really journalistic way, confronting the politician and putting hard questions before him or her. Well, most of the time it's him because a majority of Japanese senior politicians are men. When that happens, then the politicians get angry sometimes and demand an explanation from the TV stations, and sometimes even demand a replacement of the reporters and MCs and presenters, and which is incredible. And people know that it has been happening, and people know it would happen in the future too. So there's no journalism, true journalism, on Japanese TV, and that is partly because the Japanese politicians don't know better, and it's partly because the TV people, I mean the producers and journalists and and so on at the TV stations, they do not have the guts to confront the politicians. And lastly, and most importantly, the Japanese public don't know anything better because they haven't been watching this lukewarm, questioning of politicians on Japanese TV for such a long time. So the Japanese people, in general, think that TV is about entertaining politicians in a true omotenashi way. They don't know anything else. So this is really funny, but it's also tragic. And NHK, the Japanese public broadcaster, I think has got to do better in asking questions, hard questions to and politicians should allow NHK to do that. But in order to do that, I think NHK has to gather a lot of public support, and that's what I'm doing. Hey NHK, let's do it, because that's the only rationale. That's the reason why public broadcasting exists in the first place. It's not a mouse for the government. It's you should really check what the politicians say as an independent, detached critic. Only when you do that, you can do service to the public, and otherwise you are just spreading misinformation, which is not very good for the future of this country, which I really love, Japan.